So I've got my Pokédex app, and we have the API app, the Move app, Pokemon app, and I had sort of messed around with the trainer model a couple days ago, but now we're gonna really build out a proper trainer model, and we're gonna create trainers. But those trainers are gonna become we're gonna actually set it up so people can sign up with accounts and be Pokemon trainers and play, or at least interact with our Pokemon app. So I want to create a new Django app. And let me make sure I'm in the right directory to do this. And I apologize, I just had to get myself oriented there. And now I am indeed where I want to be. So I'm going to navigate into my Pokédex project. I'm going to navigate into the backend part of the project, which is the root of the Django project. And now that I see manage PY, I know that I'm home and where I want to be for this. And we're going to create a new app with the start app command, and we're going to create the trainer app. And this is where we're going to put everything related really to user accounts, that because we're going to call them trainers, right, in the context of our application. And now that I've done this, I am going to just go ahead and update my settings PY before I forget. So I'm just going to do Control F to search for installed apps. And down here after API app, I'll just put trainer app. And I'm going to look in the sidebar just to make sure I got the name right and everything. And we're looking good. We're going to probably come back to settings PY later, so I'll leave it up. But now that we have created the trainer Django app and added it to settings PY, let's make some models. So I'm in our models file for the Pokemon trainer app. And we have the models class imported, which is great. What we're going to import and what we're going to use specifically for all this authentication stuff is the abstract user model. And this comes from the Django core library, all those things listed under installed apps that were there by default. And the tab completion tells me that I'm using, that I'm getting what I want. So one important note, as you can see here, based from the tab completion, there's also a Django class called abstract base user. That's a little different. Abstract base user only really has stuff for dealing with passwords and not the stuff we want really for tokens. And in fact, if we hovered over here, we can kind of see the difference. So we don't want to use the abstract base user. We want to use abstract user. And that's the one I would recommend going with most, if not all of the time. And the cool thing is this inherits from models, right? So somewhere in the Django code is class abstract user, models dot model, what we're used to seeing, and then we get to inherit that. So this is a model class for us, and we don't have to inherit from models because abstract user already does that for us, I believe. And we can do all the other stuff we normally do with models. The most important field to add for something that's going to become really our user account model, or at least connected to it, is an email field. And we'll give it a verbose name to make it more human friendly. And we'll give it a max length of 255 characters just for fun. And this does have to be unique. I do recommend like in some ways it's easier to just, especially I think when learning this stuff, avoid dealing with like usernames and start off with just emails and emails being unique. And once you get that working, we can add in usernames a bit later. We don't have to add I'll add a little doc string to make Highland happy. We don't have to add a password field. Abstract user adds the password field for us. Which is great. So we don't have to worry about that. What we do have to do is we have to tell Django we want to use the email field as a username for login. Because, you know, if you think about, you all have seen accounts where you can have a username and you log in with a username and password, or where you can log in with an email and password. But the idea is you've got the uniquely identifying thing in the password, and we could use a different field if we wanted. We need to tell Django, this is the field that's going to be the quote unquote username. And we also want to set this required fields constant, and email, password are required by default. So we don't have to add them there. I just want to pause, check in and see if folks have any questions.
So it already knows the full caps username field. It doesn't have to be declared anywhere else.
Say that again.
It already knows what username field is, like as a variable. It doesn't have to be like declared anywhere else
Yeah.
in like required fields.
Yeah. So this is actually not, if you note, like see here for email, we're doing models.email field. So when we do this sort of models dot some sort of field, this is the bit that actually gets turned into like a column on a table, right? If I just did something like who equals hello world, this would be an attribute on my trainer class. But like Django ignores this when like creating migrations and then creating tables and stuff like this, right? Because this isn't part of the data model. All the fields that we're using, like models dot some field name, those are what kind of get turned into columns on Postgres. So over here, this all caps attribute or property on our class, it's not really a field, right? It's a class variable that is in all caps because it's a string constant. So I could do this, except then Django might complain. The all caps is more of a convention. And what we're doing here is we're telling Django, hey, for this trainer model, this field here, that's going to be the username, like when people log in with this abstract user class. And we can actually, let's take a very quick look at the abstract user class in the Django docs, because there's a couple good things to see in here, though we're going to do most of this ourselves, and we can skip through a lot of these things, and let's get to the good part where here we go. So Django has a built-in user model that also uses this abstract user class that has a username, it has a first name, it has a last name, it has email, it has a password. There's all this stuff with permissions that we can do. We're not going to use it because we want more flexibility, really, and for practice and for some other reasons as well. And because it's nice to be able to connect this to like a trainer. And hiding somewhere in here is the abstract user actual API reference, which is really what I'd like to see. It's hiding somewhere. I'll try and find it. That's the annoying part of the Django docs. But what we're doing now is we're using our trainer model, and we're going to tell Django, hey, this model, this is like the user model for passwords and all that stuff and things like that. And we're about to add this to settings.py. And so this is really configuration information for this class that abstract user is going to do, right? Because just like any other class, I could do, class, my class, and some, I apologize, I'm probably using the wrong name for the class variable, but and then, and this is hello world. So just like we can declare this variable on the class itself here, and I just happen to be doing it in all caps because it's a constant. That's what these are. And they don't get turned into the database. This is more of what Django's using to know how to use this model that we're creating. And I apologize if I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. That does lead us though to the next thing that we want to do and that we need to do, which is tell Django that we're using this as the special sort of username field. So we're just going to put somewhere in our Django app, and I think I'm going to maybe put it. It doesn't really matter where. I'll just search to make sure it's not hiding somewhere else. I'll just put it maybe after the password validation stuff. Or I'll put it at the bottom, actually. Auth user model. And now we're giving Django the namespace. Django, go look at the trainer app, Django app. Go look at the module there and find the trainer model. And this is going to use trainer model for user accounts. While we're here, the one thing that we probably do want to do is with the Django secret key, because I think we might need it in a minute. We may have modified, you may or may not have this in your settings py where you've done env.get Django key. Now that we're starting to do like authentication, I think this is when this secret key actually gets used for hashing stuff. And if I print out my .env file, I actually don't have an env file in here, so I need to bring it in. I should put it in there. We'll see if we need it or not. We'll come back to that one. It's pretty easy to generate, and we could hard code it in if we wanted to. In fact, I can do Django secret key generator. And we just need some string that's not a short string and to set that to our secret key. And I believe that gets used in authentication, but we'll come back to that one a bit later. Our next step, we've made this trainer model, and actually let me just check in to see if folks have any other questions about the trainer model and sort of abstract user. I know there's more to see, but with what we've covered thus far, what's on people's minds?
I have a question. Is the trainer part like which part is stuff that we can make up and which part is like part of, I guess, the programming.
Yeah, that Django kind of is expecting and needs.
Yes.
We can add whatever we want to this trainer model, just like we can with every other model. We do have to have this username field. And if you don't make it an email field, you'll have to make it some other field on the model, but email makes the most sense. Required fields, I think we need to have this here and have it be an empty list. If we want to, we could put stuff there, but this is really all we need right now. But we can do all the normal stuff we would do with models here.
And the name of the class, is that something we can make up, or should it be called trainer?
No, that's a great question, especially because we saw with those Django REST framework serializers, those sort of magic method names. It can absolutely be called whatever we want. I could call this, awesome user account. And then what I have to do is in settings py, auth user model, this needs to become, excuse me, awesome user account, right? And if it was in some other Django app, it could be that. So we can name it whatever we want. We just have to tell Django what we have named it here in settings py.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. Especially because there is a lot of magic with different parts of Django. So our next step is we've made a new model. We do need to make a migration. So let's do Python manage py make migrations. And oh, it would help if I activated my virtual environment. So I don't know if that actually is really critical here, but it did seem to help with the tab completion. And let's do a dry run just to see what migrations we're going to make. So this is going to create another migration file that's going to create this trainer model that's going to end up creating a table in the database. So let's go ahead and make that migration. And now let's go ahead and do migrate dash plan. And interestingly, we run into an error here, and it might be one we haven't seen before. And if I kind of scroll down, I see this raise inconsistent migration history. And if we had ran the migration, we would have seen this same error as well. And the useful bit here is migration admin 001 initial is applied before its dependency trainer app. And without going into too much detail here, remember that in our migrations, and if I kind of open up here, we see there's this one here, and in our other apps, there's more migrations, right? Like in the Pokédex, in the Pokemon app, we have a bunch of migrations, and these files are numbered, and the Django migration tool runs them in order. But sometimes like one model is related to another, or they depend on each other. And the very, very first migration that Django runs is related to user accounts and admin stuff. And our trainer model kind of depends on this because this is for a user account. So that's why we're seeing this trainer model depends on this migration that, or excuse me, the admin model depends on something that doesn't exist yet. Basically, now that this is our user model, we have to run this migration first. So the good news here is we can just drop and recreate the database, and Django will figure out how to run and apply the migrations correctly. And I just will have to re-add some Pokemon data And if we have fixture data here, which was a great suggestion by someone, we may not, but I can quickly construct some. We'll just have to re-add some Pokemon. So let's go ahead and drop this database. And I'm going to double check that I have my database name. Is what I expect it to be. And this is a great example of why it is useful to create fixtures as you go. So we're going to run dropdb, which is going to run a Postgres drop database command on Pokédex DB. And we're going to give the computer a minute. And it's being used by other things, which probably means I have Django server running, which I do indeed here, because that's sort of part of my normal flow. So I'm just going to kill all those servers right now. Let's run this again. Success. Notice it told us there's one other session, so that's a good hint. It was just that one thing. Now let's create the database again. And now if I do Python manage py migrate -- plan, fingers crossed, this works out fine. And we can actually see kind of a preview of what's happening here. And somewhere in here is the stuff related to our trainer. It probably is related to this stuff where I'm seeing like alter field email on user, alter field username on user. You know, if I had to guess, this is where that's happening. And in fact, we see all that stuff happening. And then we see this trainer model is going to be created. And then all this other Pokemon stuff happens, right? Because Django kind of does this stuff for users, and there's probably a users table under the hood that we're never going to directly interact with. So that's just the kind of one gotcha to be aware of when you create our custom user model like we just did with abstract class. So if you see that error, it means drop and then rebuild the database. So let's actually run this migration. And it seems to have worked great. And as a sanity check, let's run the server. And it looks like I am running into one error here. Let's see if we can track it down. Improperly configured. I'm using the static files without having set the static URL setting. I'm a little surprised to see that one, because I feel like I haven't done much with that. Let's see if we can't quickly track this one down so that we can keep on rolling. And let's see if there's any other issues here. So the other thing that is sometimes worth doing, especially because I'm doing a lot of like sort of copying code from one repo to another, is every now and then I'll like something goes wrong with dependencies and I've like destroyed and rebuilt my virtual environment. But let's just do actually a very quick Google search of this. I have a suspicion we're just going to have to set the static URL constant in settings py, but I'm actually not 100%. And rather than just fiddling around, I'm going to take just a minute and see if there's maybe a Stack Overflow post that actually will clear this up so we can know exactly what the issue is and how to resolve it. So yeah, static files we're going to get into more later. We're not really using them much now because we don't, it's like where you put a CSS file or a JavaScript file, but that's what the vdev server is doing for us, which is why I'm a little surprised to see this. So from this Stack Overflow post, it looks like maybe we can use this, or there's an if statement to get rid of. And to reiterate, the reason I'm a little surprised is because static files refers to, again, like CSS files, JavaScript files, stuff like that. And we're not doing any of that stuff with Django. So let's see. Let's try static root. So there isn't any static files, anything here. So maybe Django is just unhappy about that. Maybe I accidentally deleted it when modifying settings py somewhere else. So let's just try pasting this in and seeing what happens. I do then want to import this OS. And let me make sure I get that import correct. Yeah, and it's OS is from Python and not Django. It's one of the Python, part of the Python standard library, so we can just do import OS. So let's see if this does it. Maybe I need to put it earlier because settings py does get run one line at a time. And what we do have is static files here in sort of by default. And the error message does say improperly configured, you're using the static files app. And that's exactly what this is on line 44 here, without having set the required static URL setting. So let's try moving this up. And I'm just going to move this all the way to the top. In fact, there's no reason not to. We might get an error again. Let's actually find out where the base directory is to find. So we actually should put this right after the base directory since it uses that variable. The error message mentioned a static. It mentioned a different static URL variable. And indeed, it does say that there. So I suspect we just need to follow this pattern, but change this to static URL. So I think we're almost home. And if we kind of dig through here, in fact, this may be even easier because the URL is not even like a full-on directory. It's just a path that says, hey, if we get an HTTP request that has /static, go to this directory, grab a CSS file or an image asset from here. And now things seem to be working. And again, I apologize. I'm not sure why that came up. Probably just from kind of moving slight changes in the project code from day to day. Because Vite Dev Server is doing all of that work. And let's see here, localhost. Let's start with localhost 8000. And now I'm getting another error about the secret key. And this is a good problem because this one is an easy fix. And this is actually good to touch on because we'll have to be doing this. So I want to grab my env file from the other day because we set up env and .files and we're using that in various places. And we're using it for the Django secret key as well. And the Django key, we basically want it to be a random string. You should use if you Google like Django key generator, because we also want it to sort of be like a securely generated random string. There's also a function that we can call, but it honestly doesn't make a huge difference for us. And this belongs in our now that we've set it up this way in our .env file. And I think this does become more relevant because it's part of what's used to securely turn like a password into a hash and like create these auth tokens and stuff. So I'm just going to move into our demos and notes. And I know I have an env file with this floating around from a day or two ago. So let's try maybe day 6. And let's see if I have an env file there. I do, but I want the key, which I think I've made in day 7. So let's go into day 7. And there I've got the env file that I want with my Django secret key. So I'm just going to copy this and we're going to create an env file. We're going to open it up. I apologize about this, folks, and paste this in. And now I think we should be rolling. So the server's starting up again, which is always a good sign. And if we go to localhost, now we're getting what we expect, right? This is the error that we've seen just because we don't have like a home page route set up. If I do API v1 noun, we've modified the noun one, right? So if I do like cat, there's a JSON decoding error, and that's probably more from how we're doing it, but let's try Pokemon, right? So now this is working. And in fact, I think Django REST framework, I see it lets us specify the format here. And we could do API v1 moves, and we don't have any Pokemon or moves because I rebuilt the database. But now we're seeing what we expect to. So I apologize about that. And let's kind of come back to building out our trainer model. It is a good example of why it's always a good idea to get your code running after everything that we do. Because every now and then, you know, there will be like hiccups or typos, or, you know, like I clearly made an error at some point along the line there. So what I think I'll do is just kind of finish off the setup here so we can see that, and circle back, and I'll load some fixture data in later because we don't need that right away to begin with. But if I had fixture data in my app, this is the point at which I would run the load data command to use that as well. So I don't think I have this set up. I don't think I have these files at the moment, but like if I did like moves data JSON, would build that, and the file isn't there, so that's why I'm getting the error. So if you do have those, just go ahead and run those. But the Django secret key bit was important because that did need to happen. And actually, we will need to do a little more poking around settings PY, because we need to install a couple more dependencies. Django REST framework has an auth token module. Now, I believe that was installed when we installed Django REST framework, so I don't think we need to install another dependency with pip. We just need to tell Django that we want to use it. We do need to add some configuration information for Django REST framework. And first I want to check to make sure that there's not anything like that that exists. And then I am going to go ahead and add it, and I'll just add it right here. We're going to create a constant variable, really just a variable, but all caps indicating it's a const named REST framework. And this is going to be a dictionary, and that's pretty common for configuration information. And the first key is going to be default authentication classes. And we need to tell Django REST framework what kind of authentication we want to do. Right, and there are more configuration steps because we do have to hook all these pieces together. But now Django REST framework will do so much of the work of token authentication for us. And let me just pause and check in with folks because I know it took a little while to debug. So I just want to kind of just to recap what we did. We created our trainer model. Then we made our migration. And when we tried to apply the migration, we found out, hey, because this trainer model is going to be our user, and we've told Django that in settings PY, that migration really needs to be applied earlier. We actually need to rebuild our database. So I dropped the database and rebuilt it, and then ran into this side issue with static files that we got figured out. And now what we're doing is we are using another module that can install the Django REST framework, REST framework.auth token. And we're telling Django REST framework, when we do all of our authentication stuff, use token authentication. So let me just pause and check in and see if folks have any questions. And then maybe this is also a good time for a short break. But what's on people's minds? Yes, I see. Josh, yes, sir.
Yeah, this is just something small, but I'm looking at the curriculum and it's using square brackets for like right after default authentication classes.
Oh,
But you use curly's.
thank you so much.
Like that.
Yeah, that is definitely not small at all. We absolutely do need to do it that way. Django REST framework wants this to be a list and not another dictionary. So thank you very much. Oh, and Paulina, I saw your message in the chat about static URL equaling static, and I got there eventually. Thank you for the heads up about that. What are some other questions that folks have? Okay, cool. Let's take a 5-minute break. Does that sound good? And then let's use this and let's write our API views. And do you all want to do 5 or 10? We more comfortable with either. All right, let's do 5, and then we'll come back and we'll actually implement the API views. So thank you all very much, and see you all in 5 minutes.
Hey, Adam, if you're talking, you're muted.
Oh, thank you so much. I was totally muted. I was, first of all, is everyone looking at a diagram right now that says like token authentication flow? Awesome. I was saying there's some nifty tools we can use to kind of like, there's some web tools and there's tools we can actually use to like build these in VS Code with text. And I'll share the tools and like the image of this later for people, but just kind of like go over this right now. So diagrams like this are good for like seeing how the different parts of our system talk to each other. So we've got our React app running in the browser, and that's the client. We've got Django, that's the server, and we've got Postgres over here. So we're not going to worry too much about all the React stuff and focus more on like the HTTP requests going back and forth. And for signing in, as you can kind of see, what happens is the browser sends a post request to a sign up endpoint, right? To create an account. And we're going to send the email and the password. Django's abstract user is going to do most of the work for us. It's going to generate a hash. We're going to use the trainer model. And these annotations are actually kind of terrible, so let me just get rid of them. We're going to use the trainer model and create a new trainer and save it to the database with that hashed password and the email. Then right when someone signs up, we might as well make them an auth token. So we're going to do that too. The auth token needs to get saved to the database as well. And then finally, we send back to the user a success response. And in the body of the response is some JSON, an auth token. And that is our signup flow. And then when we actually use the auth token, once we've created an account, it's a pretty similar process. We don't need to create the account, and we're going to hit a different endpoint, right? We're not doing sign up. We're doing login, and we're sending our username and password. This is if, the token has expired and it's a day or two and we need to log in again. Same thing, something very similar happens. We don't have to create a new trainer model, but Django is going to take that password, hash it, which will get this hashed password value that's saved in the database, check it against what's in the database. And if it's all good, then it'll create a new auth token that I think there's like a default expiration date of it might be like a day or 6 hours or something, and we can set that if we want. And once that's saved to the database, we send the token back and the user has it. And now when we want to use the token, we pass it as a request header in every request for the things that we want to protect. And Django's abstract user will check, make sure that the auth token matches. And if it does, then we're good to go. So we only need that username and password on login. And I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions, and then let's definitely start writing some code. Okay, awesome. And I'll have this diagram and stuff shared later. And I will just put this maybe off to the side as we start writing our code. And I can remove the diagram if it's getting in the way of things. So we've created our trainer model. We've told it that we're going to use email as the username. We've told Django we're going to use the trainer as the user model to authenticate and log in. We run our migrations. And we've told Django we're going to use this auth token module from Django REST framework. We've told Django REST framework we're going to use token authentication. And Josh, thank you again for pointing out that this needs to be a list and not another object. So now we can start building out some routes and actually using this. Let's add a route at our top level routing for our whole project, like we've been for our trainer. We'll call it users, which makes it's a good convention, and it makes it clear that this is for users and for logging in. If we really wanted to, I think we could have it be trainers as well. I don't think there's any magic in the naming there. And we're going to include the URLs PY file from trainers. And now we do have to create that as well, since that doesn't exist by default when we create a URLs PY. And here, we're going to import path like we normally do. We're going to write an API view shortly that we'll need to import and use here. And we're gonna want to like also import login. Excuse me. Login, log out, and we're gonna write an info API view to help us. And we're gonna need a couple paths, right? We're gonna want the user to be able to sign up. And that's gonna use our sign up view. And we'll give it a name to make it easier to refer to, and it will just be sign up. And we'll implement these other paths. And in fact, this one isn't real yet either, but we're going to want a path to log in. At some point, we're going to want to give the user the option to log out. And for the user to get profile information or any other information about themselves that we want to give. So these are the routes that we're going to build, and we'll have API/v1 sign up and log in and log out, or excuse me, API/v1/user sign up, log in, log out. And to implement this, we're going to need to start writing some views. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's go to views.py for our trainer app and start building things. So we're not going to really need that render one. And I'll add a doc string that says trainer app views. And we're going to need to build our sign up view. And we're going to need to import a bunch of stuff to do this. So I'll kind of talk through a bit of this a bit later, but we're going to need to import an authenticate function that comes from Django's core library. We're going to need to import the trainer model. And we're going to need to import a bunch of stuff from Django REST framework. We're going to need to import the API view that we're used to and familiar with. We're going to need to import the response that we're used to and familiar with. We're going to need to import a bunch of HTTP status codes that we've seen. And I'm wondering if I have a typo here because of these squigglies. And like before, I probably was using curly brackets in the wrong spot. And now I believe if I do HTTP, now I get the autocomplete. And so I know that that's correct. Right. So again, tab completion really is your friend because it helps identify typos and syntax errors. Then let's see what this complaint is to make sure there's not a syntax error going on with any of this stuff. This is all just a bunch of unused complaints, but we're going to be using them all very shortly. And I'll just sort of do a little bit of separation here so we can see this stuff, because I realize with all these red squigglies, it's a little hard to see right now. From REST framework, we're also going to import now from the auth token module that we really kind of installed, or rather configured Django to use. And it's got a model. It's got some model stuff. We're going to need a token. We're going to need its token authentication. let me go ahead and fix this import statement. And we're going to need an is authenticated a class that comes not from auth token, but from permissions. And these are going to do most of the work for us. And now we can write a sign up class. And it'll inherit from an API view as normal. For signing up, are we ever going to send a GET request to our sign up endpoint? Any guesses?
I'd say no.
Yeah. We're not going to ever send a GET request to our sign up endpoint because the whole point of it is to send a username and password. And the way we want to send that information is in the body of the request like we've been doing, and that's going to be a post. And because when we're signing up, we're creating a new user, we're creating a resource. And the same way that when we created a Pokemon to follow the patterns of a REST API, we did a post request, we're creating a user account. So this is going to be a post request as well. And we want to grab from request.data. We got to do a little dancing here because we're probably going to have the user just to send the email, and that will probably be the name of the field. But because username is sort of how Django thinks about logging in, we need to tell it, we need to create this username property so that we can just pass this request around and the data around, and the rest of Django will play nice with it. And we're going to create a new trainer. But we're going to use this create user method that comes from that abstract user class, I believe. And we're going to use the double star, which I believe does some Quargs magic. And if anyone maybe wants to kind of remind us of what's going on there. Can anyone maybe remind me what's happening when we do this double star and pass in this request.data dictionary?
It's just gonna take all the data from like the keywords that match and implement them without having to like specify each one in the parentheses.
Yeah, and I think it makes them each a named argument, right? Yeah, awesome. Exactly. And so that's why we had to do this extra step here of creating this username property, because again, under the hood, Django thinks in terms of usernames and passwords, and we're using the email in this case for the username. Now that we've done this, we're going to create the authentication token, and we use this token class that comes from Django REST framework to do that. And we pass it the instance of the user model that this token is going to be created for. And I believe that in this step, Django also then saves the token. So all of this stuff here in green under like Django abstract user awesomeness, I had to do a little shorthand here, and I just did .save to get the idea across. But this is where we create the trainer and the user model, create the token, and right here we're also saving the token in the database for that user. So this is great because this is actually a whole lot of stuff that happens, and it's like 3 lines of code. We haven't had to deal with like password hashing or anything like that. Like Django and Django REST framework are doing all of this for us. And now we can return a response. And we're going to send back a dictionary that will get turned into JSON. And we're going to send back the trainer email, because that can be useful to have, and the token itself. And we use this property key on the token, and that returns the token string that then we pass in all our future requests coming from the browser. And we're going to send as our response status a 201 created, because we just created a user account. And that's really all there is to it. And let's see if I have a typo or anything like that. So I do see some squigglies here with expected parameter name. And it would be because for status, yep, I see exactly what happened. The dictionary ends there. Then we have a comma, and status is our other named argument. And what I'll actually do, because it helps me keep this clear, is if I have like big multiple arguments, this is a syntax that comes from JavaScript world, right? In fact, we could even do it like this. I don't think Django will complain about that if we wanted to. Yeah, it might, because it's Python is has like white space sensitivity and stuff. But so we're passing back two arguments, the response body, and then a named argument for our HTTP response status. And this handles user sign up, and we can now make this route real, which is awesome. So let me just pause and check in and see if folks have any questions.
Is the function create user already on the abstract model, or is that something we have to put on ourselves?
That is already on the abstract model. Yeah, that's a good question. And that's part of the benefits of the abstract model. And if we could find the right spot in the Django docs, we would probably see that there. And we sort of hinted at here. If we hover over here, we see this base manager class that we haven't seen before, and that's kind of coming from the abstract model. We might be able to, if we go to models here, or I'm sorry, from abstract user. Yeah, we could probably look at the Django user model and track it down. Create user is also what hashes. So create user comes from Django user model, abstract user, and hashes the password for us. Right, so this turns my secret password into consistently in a repeatable way into like a bunch of numbers and letters that cannot easily be reversed back into the password, and that's what gets stored into the database.
Could we see a post request with this, with the Thunder client?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead, and I think we could leave. I'll just close these out, and let's open up Thunder client. And we're going to want to do post, and we're going to go to 127.0.0.1 8000 /API /v1/user/signup, if I have that right. And let me just hit that endpoint and make sure I've got it right there. And let me make sure my server is running. So running the server would be a good start. And it looks like I have a typo here, cannot import name, token authentication, which is almost definitely a typo. And it's coming from the views, well, rather in URLs py. So let's just Get rid of that stuff. Let's see if we have this again.
Adam,
Yes.
views on line 13, you have what is it? A REST framework dot auth token. It should be just authentication. REST framework dot authentication.
Thank you so much.
I think, yeah.
Thank you very much, Paulina. Awesome. And now, in fact, the server is running, which is great. So let's just not even put any data here and send a post request. And so we get back a 404. That's a pretty good start. We can add some print statements if we need to, but yeah, let's just try putting in the body here, the properties we need. And I'm going to go back to my view to double check. And we're expecting email. And we're also expecting password, though we don't use it here. It gets used inside create user. So if I add email, we should get an error, but a different one. API/v1/user/signup. Let's make sure that I have my URLs correct. And it indeed is users plural. So that is probably part of the problem. Because I would have expected not all this HTML back. I would have expected a different kind of error from trying to create a user without a password. So that's kind of how I knew something was up. And we probably need to have it end in a slash. And now this is the kind of error that I'm expecting. Insert into auth token something, 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 something. We'll find out in a moment if I have an issue in my code or if this is Django's way of saying you need to include a password. I always recommend just do the simplest possible passwords for stuff so they're easy to remember. So it looks like a couple things actually happened here, which is interesting because now I'm getting this detail key username. Adam at Code Platoon already exists. So what that tells me is that who knows what default password was created, but I did indeed create a user for myself. And that other error may have been I'm doing something wrong in creating the auth token. So let's clear this and let's just start making up some names and seeing what our error messages are. So we've got relation auth token does not exist. This makes me wonder if there's a migration issue, but it appears that users were created. So what I want to do is first, let's go into pSQL. And it shortly, I think we'll take a break too, so we can switch gears and start looking at the front end. But let's go into pSQL. Let's connect to the Pokédex DB. Let's make sure it's the database that I expect to see. I do indeed see the trainer here. Let's see who's in trainer app trainer. And indeed, we have those users that were put in. And in fact, you can see there's this password field, and this is not a password at all. It is some super long hash. So the password hashing may be being handled correctly. My first thought is honestly to check if I have an issue in my code in the view function related to sending back the token. So I just want to give that code a once over. And then if we still have problems, then we'll come back and dig into this a bit more. So stepping from this, insert into auth token, relation auth token does not exist. So what I also want to do is look at all the tables in here. I see trainer. It feels like maybe there's a model issue because we're talking about relationships. But let's double check my code first. I wonder if I'm using this token incorrectly. Let's double check with the Django REST framework. Token class. And let's confirm that I am using that the way that we want to. So somewhere in here, we'll find the token class. We go to API reference, we've got token authentication. And a couple of things here. Installed apps, REST framework dot auth token. So let me go to settings PY and make sure I got that right. And I did. I didn't put authorization in there by mistake, like I had flipped with that other issue. And indeed, it looks like from REST framework auth token models import token objects create, and we should have that as well. And we pass in the user as such. We could print out the token. I suspect there may be a migration that needs to be run. Let's do Python. Let's double check. Make migrations. Dry run. Let's do Python manage py migrate plan. So there is indeed, at some point, I must have missed running a migration. My suspicion, so just to kind of backtrack, the error message talking about like relations at the database level, it made it sound like a table was missing, which is kind of why I started thinking about this. And the other reason being, we've added this REST framework auth token, and maybe there's some sort of migration that goes along with that. So let's see if we can run this migration and have everything work. So that's a great sign. So you may want, once you add, really, I think the takeaway here is, as a rule of thumb, whenever we add anything to installed apps, see if we need to create migrations or apply migrations. And you could just run them, or if you like using the dry run or plan flags, you could do that as well. So I think that's what the issue that I ran into here. And now, fingers crossed, our server will run, and we can try this again and see what happened. And we did me, and we did Alice, and now let's do Bob. And there we go. So that it's always satisfying once the bug is fixed and the feature works. And now we have created Bob as well. And if I look in my database, in fact, there is now this auth token underscore token table, and I'm pretty sure that was not there a moment ago until I ran that migration. And then we see Bob in the database as well.
Adam, do you know
yes.
how we would get it so you can't have that default password? So like the blank string where like the first one you entered was yours and it went ahead and accepted it?
Not off the top of my head. If you look at the docs for the Django user model, if there's a way to do it, that is probably where it is. The other way to do it, actually, that would be very straightforward, is we would have to check if we could probably do it between here and here. I could probably do like trainer password. We'd have to check, because I'm not sure at which point here exactly the default password is created. It's probably right here, right? So we might be able to do just, I'll pseudocode it, but if no password in request, create a default one or throw on air, send back a response. Right, we might not need to mess with the user model at all. We could put in some, validation type logic in the API view itself, which is not uncommon. Yeah, that's a great question. What other questions do folks have? Cool, that was
So is what appears, sorry,
no, go ahead.
is what appears as the password then in the database, is that the token when we do it this way?
No, I don't think so. The password gets hashed. Basically, if my password is password, it gets turned into maybe every letter is replaced with a number, but in a much fancier way that's difficult to reverse. And that's sort of how the Django secret key is used. That's what goes in the database. Every time you log in, we check to make sure the password matches the hash password, like we actually hash the password and check it. And then a new token is generated for the session, and that goes in the database too, because we have this auth token table, right? It's called auth token underscore token. So if we do select star from auth token underscore token, so we have this one token 533 that's super long, and lo and behold, that exactly matches what was just sent back when I created Bob, and the hash password is something else. And that way tokens can expire, they can be invalidated, and it doesn't mess with the password or its hash at all. And note here, we have created an user ID, and we can use this to expire a token after a certain amount of time. And this is how we know which user the token's for. And Sean, thank you for sharing the link about hashing. It's pretty neat. It's just a little bit out of scope. Let's go ahead and build a login view, because I think that will be really good to see as well. Right now that we got sign up rolling, let's create a login. And I'm not going to worry about those squigglies because everything is working. So I ran into some issues along the way. I apologize. I know that can really mess with the flow. Hopefully seeing the debugging process has some value as well. I tend to move a bit slow in the debugging process sometimes, but I found as long as I'm systematic, that's what ends up mattering the most. Because what you really want to avoid debugging is just you spend 3 hours on something and then it was right in front of your face the whole time. So I've kind of over time developed a debugging approach that might take a little longer, but tries to double check assumptions to avoid those things, because those are the things that really suck up time when you're working on a project for, like days or a week. So we're going to get the email field or the email property from request.data. And, there's a couple ways to access a Python dictionary. So we're just going to use get in this case. And we're going to get the password as well. I think using get here should work fine. If not, we'll find out very quickly. And here's the nifty part. We're going to use this authenticate function, and let me make sure that I have imported it, which indeed I have. This comes from Django. This is what will take our password, apply the hashing algorithm, which uses that Django secret key, by the way, which is what's called a salt, and confirms that the password is indeed for the username by comparing those hashes. And again, in Django world, accounts and logging in are all about usernames. So the username keyword is what's used here. And we're using email, and that's kind of why we have to tell the trainer model like email is user and all this stuff. And we have to then also explicitly pass it in here as well. And we pass in the password as well. And then this will either succeed or fail if the email and password are correct. If it succeeds, we will have an instance of our trainer model. If it fails, we'll return an error. We actually want to be a little careful in our error messages. We would not want to say something like this, because if we give out the information, if someone malicious could use this to figure out if I have an account with this software or not, and write a script to, test, to deliberately fail just to see if there is no, email address. Like if we tried to, we actually don't want to return rich error information for authentication stuff. We wouldn't want to say like invalid login email does not exist. Right? Because that tells someone malicious information about who or who does not have an account here. So this first message is great because it doesn't tell anyone if it's the email or the password that failed. So we're going to use this method on the token class, which is actually a model. As we saw, there's that auth token model in the database, and that is what this token class interacts with. It's a model that lets us save tokens and get tokens and do all this other stuff. And we are going to get or create a token. Because I might log in, but I might have just logged in 20 minutes ago and I'm going to the sign up page for whatever reason, but I actually already have a token there. And we pass the trainer model, right, which is our user model that we're doing this for. Get or create returns a tuple. And so that's what we're getting back here. And that's why we have this syntax here. Token is our auth token. Created is a Boolean telling us if the token was just created or already existed, right? Because that can be useful information as these things get more complex. Sometimes we might want to invalidate tokens after a certain amount of time, or there are just reasons why sometimes that's valuable to know. So we don't need to send the user back information about created. We can now return a response with our token. That's going to look an awful lot like the one we just wrote for sign up. And we're going to return the trainer email as well, just so that our client program React has that info if they want to use it. And that's it. It should return a 200 response by default, which is what we want. And that's the login method. There's not that much else to it. Really, the next step here is to make it real. And import it. And give us a name to help us use it. And now I should be able to use Thunder Client to log in as well. Though I may just have had an incorrect name here. Let's see. Or that may be an old error message. No, let's see. Cannot import name log_in. Maybe I have my import path incorrect here. Let's do a split and see what's going on. And what's
think you-
going on? Oh, go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, that one.
We were both going to the same place.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I defined the login class inside the signup class. And so it doesn't exist at the top level in that module, and there's nothing to export, right? Which is an easy mistake to make. And again, my flow here kind of was, hey, that name looks right. Let's double check. It is right. Okay, what's going on? Let's get rid of the stuff I don't care about. And then it turns out that this is in the wrong spot. And this is the best kind of problem to have. Right. And now let's see if things are working. That all should be at the top level. The server VS Code probably just needs a minute to like refresh itself, so to speak, because this seems to be working okay. And now if I go to Thunder client, and we've got this response, and let's see if there's a nifty way to save this. I'm sure there's a way to save this in Thunder client. What I honestly end up doing half the time is just sticking these in a text file, right? And in fact, I'm just gonna, for the moment, I'm just gonna put this up here, or just I'll put it at the bottom here in like a doc string. I just want to stick it somewhere in a text file so I can play with it, because we want to, let's use this to log in, right? And the login request is also always a post, because we are passing information in the body. And you can think of it, we are gonna create a new token, quite possibly. So it's a post request. And it would help if I let's try it out with like a bad password. And there we go. No trainer matching credentials. And now if I add the correct password, we're rolling. So now we've got sign up and we've got login. Log out and sort of writing a user info view. I think I will implement those a bit quickly, and then we can take a short break, because I realize it's been a bit of a long morning and I want to make sure that we get to some of the front end stuff. Before doing that, this is probably like the most useful bit that we're building here with this login. And I do want to see if just folks have any questions that we might be able to quickly clear up or dig into.
Yeah, I dropped a question in the chat, Adam. So like if we're trying to authenticate the trainer, isn't there already an existing token which would make like creating a token unnecessary? Or is there a new token created every time?
That's a great question. So when I sign up for the first time, I'm going to get a token back. The token has a built-in expiration date, which we can manually change if we want, but let's just say it's 24 hours. I wait 3 days. I want to do stuff again. If I don't log in, I'll get a message saying like, hey, you need to log in. I log in, I get a token. Now I can use that token for 24 hours. And it might be longer. And that's why, you know, all these websites, like you don't have to log in every single time, depending on how kind of secure and the particular needs of the application. We can set different expiration lengths for that token. But so at some point, the token should expire. We don't want them to last forever. That would be a pretty big risk. And at that point, you're going to have to log in again and get a new one. So you are correct that sometimes we'll log in and there already is a token, and that's kind of what that hints at. And if that token is still valid, that one will just be used and a new one won't be created.
And so is the token separate from the hash string, like our hash password?
Yes, they're completely separate things.
Okay.
They're actually stored in different parts of the database. Like we can see here in auth token, here's a token. Let's actually select star from, oh man, if I can remember, trainer app. Let's do trainer app trainer. Whatever the heck this hashed password is for these users, it's awfully long, but we can like just visually see it's not the same thing as the token that starts with like 533 whatever, and we have this other thing, and we want that because there are all sorts of good reasons why we might expire or invalidate tokens. Like we want the token to have an expiration status, and we don't want to have that mess with the password or the hash password. If the token gets exposed for some reason and for security reasons we need to invalidate it, we don't want to like have to make the user create a new password. So there are a lot of good reasons for those to be totally separate things. And yeah, that's a great question. Oh, and Francisco, thank you for sharing in the chat. When the user logs out, the token gets deleted. Yeah, and that's what we're going to implement in just a minute. And I'll just quickly bring up the notes that I have, and we can look at some of these flows. And see what other questions folks have, and then we'll implement these other pieces. So this is what we've built, where I'll just close. Yeah, we'll just make this larger for now. So this is our sign up flow. I send a post request with my email and password. Django's going to generate a password hash. We create a new user account, right? A new row in the trainer table. There's probably another users table, and our email and hash password gets saved in Postgres. We then create an auth token that gets saved in a different table in Postgres, and like auth token _ token. Then we send back in our HTTP response to our React program the token. And then we can, now, once we have the token, let's say I just signed up. I just created a new account, right? And I don't have to log in because I just created the account. If we wanted to do like email verification, then maybe there's that extra step, right? And we don't get right to it. But we just created an account. We're not worrying about email verification. I've got my token. I want to use it. And I'll get at least a part of this implemented, and we'll just wrap the rest up after lunch. And we do all the normal stuff we do with React, but now in the request header, I need to pass that authorization token. Axios makes this really, really easy. It's 2 lines of code that we have to put in one spot, and then this authorization token is passed all the time. All that work we did in settings PY and Django to configure all this stuff means that now if there's no token, stuff won't work. Django will look at the token, it will check it against the saved token for that user, and like the token has like embedded in it the user email. There's some function or something that can be run, or the user ID probably, or something, some way of identifying the user from that token. And if it matches and the token's still good, we get to do whatever we want in Django. And this is going to be true whether we're getting a resource to read or whether we're updating something like with the trainer profile. It's the exact same flow. Now that we've set up token authentication, if we don't do this, things will fail. If I try to get a Pokemon, but I'm not sending the auth token and it's not there at all, we'll get some sort of error back, because right away Django will just be, hey, you need an authorization token. And an error message is sent back that we would handle in our React app just like any other error. If the token is, say, expired because it's been 3 days since we last did anything, and the token has a 24-hour expiration policy. Or maybe we logged out, but the token is still in our local storage. So I need to update this because I should be sending the indicate here we're sending an invalid token, but we send an invalid token. The token does not match, or it's expired or revoked, or it's been probably deleted from the database. Like Francisco was saying, it's not even that it matches, it's not there anymore. And then again, there's an error message. And on the React side of our app, we have to handle telling the user like, hey, you need to sign in again, basically. So this is a very similar case to the other one, but those are sort of what those flows look like. I do want to go ahead and implement deleting and getting some user information, because I think those will be useful. And then we can maybe take a couple other questions, and we'll have to get to the front end stuff briefly after lunch. I do apologize. And maybe what we'll do is we'll just gather like after an hour so that we can still have a bit of work time. There is some work that needs to happen as well, sort of for super users, for Django admin. I think that one I probably won't be able to get to right now. I apologize. But let's build out a couple useful utility API views for us that will make life a little easier. Let's build out one called info. And we can hook into a lot of the stuff that Django REST framework does for us here. And I'll talk about these in just a moment. And this is for a GET request from someone who has a token. And we're going to return user profile information. And a couple interesting things happen here because we're hooking into all of these built-in things. Basically, again, we're leveraging Django to do the work for us. What we're saying here is, hey, Django REST framework, we're using token authentication. Please go ahead and check. Is there an authorization token in the request header here? And Django REST framework does all that work. And if there is, it just goes ahead and grabs that user from the database and adds it to this request object. Because the more and more we do this, the easier this makes life. And then we're also indicating some rules around like levels of permissions. And what we're saying is that, hey, this user has to be authenticated. Like in order for anything with this API view to work, the user has to have a valid authorization token for themselves. And then we can send back some user information. And so now, like if I go to our URLs PY, let me make sure I don't have any typos or anything like that here. It starts to become very, very easy to use this. Right? We're not even passing. Remember, we used to have like kind of pass arguments and stuff in there. We don't have to do like if request.headers authorization exists and if it's valid with the database and all of that. We don't even have to get the user from the database. Django REST framework is doing all of that for us based on that authorization token, which is awesome. And similarly, logging out. is pretty straightforward. And it's going to look very similar to what we just did here. We're telling Django and Django REST framework that we are going to need an authentication, some kind of authentication to do anything with this API view. And that kind of authentication is going to be token authentication. And we're telling it that in order for anything to happen with this API view, the user associated with this authentication token has to be authentic. It has to be themselves. We have to have a valid auth token here for a user that exists to do any stuff here. And this is a post request as well. Because we're not, you know, it gets a little fuzzy. Like we're not deleting a user account. If we used, I think, the HTTP delete verb, that would kind of communicate the wrong thing. And that's where sort of like the rules of REST APIs can be a little bit fuzzy sometimes. And again, Django REST framework now does all the work of checking that the auth token is valid, getting our user data for that token, and adding it to this request object. So I can now do request.user, and I know I have a valid authenticated user. And we're just going to delete the auth token. And that will be deleted in that row from the database. Because when someone logs out, we want to, that means you've got to log in again, right? If you logged out but didn't have to log in, that would not be what we want. So we need to delete the auth token, which will force a login no matter what. And we just send back one of the success responses that doesn't have anything in it. And we can go ahead and make this path real as well. And actually, we can test these out, and that's probably a good pausing point. We'll see, you know, what questions people have or what's on their minds, what's on your minds. Let's do logout. So that looks pretty good.
52.
Sorry?
I think there's a mistake on line 52 with the email. The colon is inside the parent. I mean, not the parent, the quotes.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Clarice. Perfect. And I was wondering too, because I was seeing these squigglies here and here, but those are because I just need to import them. Log in, log out, info. So I think we're looking good. These are just telling me they want doc strings. This is my helper text for Bob's account. And let's actually keep working with Bob, right? We've logged in. Let's log in again with Bob to make sure we have like a valid token. Let's just go ahead and I'm going to grab this stuff as well and just put this over here in my helper text file. Let's do something interesting with Bob, like get some information. Let me make sure I have my route right there. And it is indeed info. It may want that appending slash. And now we're not going to put anything in the body. Oh, there we go. I think it's called, the names always throw me off a little bit. I believe it's called a bearer token. I might have to add the word authorization here along with the token. We'll see in just a moment.
It goes under headers.
Oh, just as
Yeah,
authorization.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you. And do I need to add anything in front of the token itself?
The word token.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm unsure what this auth does here. It might do that for us. It might do something different. I actually don't know. Let's see here. Method post not allowed. which makes sense because this is a GET request for user info. And now we've got Bob, right? So this is the token in action. And this is why once we have this up and running, it's really nice. And now if I want to make a logout post, let's go ahead and do that. And Bob is about to log out. And I probably need the trailing slash. And we have successfully logged out. And now if I try to get information about Bob with that same token that was valid just a moment ago, it should fail. Fingers crossed. And indeed, we get an invalid token message, which is exactly what we want. And if I log in again, we really don't want to pass an auth token on a login request. I'm actually curious what it'll say. Some kind of server error. If I log in with a token, we might get an error too. Yeah, which makes sense because you really wouldn't want to log in with a token. So let's not.
You want your prepending slash if you're trying to try it out with a token.
Oh, thank you so much. I may have jumped the gun there. Thanks, Francisco. Invalid token, which makes sense that the token is going to be looked at first, which is what we would want. So now this works, and now we have a new token, right? And now if I use my new token, things should be working again. And I'll get rid of this from body, and let's get info about Bob. And that is probably just because I need to check that box. And because the info is a GET request. So we just successfully logged in, used the token on another endpoint, logged out, logged in again, got a new token, and used it again. Now's definitely a good time to break for lunch. I might have us come back a little early from lunch, or we might just dive into the React stuff right after lunch. Just as a brief preview, we'll see the whole bit, but really the magic is these two lines of code that we're doing with Axios, where once we log in, we get the token, we save it to local storage, and we tell Axios to always set this authorization header. So we won't have to manually do this every time. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good lunch. Let's just plan on coming back at the normal time at 1:30 Central. And I'll wrap with the second and final part of the lesson then on the React front end side of things. So again, thank you. I really appreciate your patience, and hopefully, though it's cool to see how this is happening. And I'm happy to stick around a little bit for anyone who has questions, but please definitely, if you want to hop off the screen, get some food, and stand up and stretch and stuff.
Hey Adam, can we get some breakout rooms open?
Oh, absolutely. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.